You're listening to the Lavender Witch Podcast. We're here to talk about all things related to queer spirituality with a focus on witchcraft and pagan practices. In this place, you are welcome, you are valued, and your story matters. I'm your host, Sam Wise. I'm an author, a columnist, a pagan priestess, and a real-life queer witch. Thanks for joining me today. This week, I am joined by fellow author and reclaiming witch, Irisanya Moon. Irisanya is the author of over 10 books, including Pantheon the Greeks and Pagan Portals Hecate. And we had a really lovely conversation about the importance of love and community care, as you will hear. Well, thank you so much for being with me, especially since I know it's very early for you. I know we had some time zone issues with scheduling. So thank you. I'm thrilled to have you here. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself just to get us started?
Sure thing. Yeah, thanks for having me. And not too early here, but the other side of the world does make things complicated. Hi, I'm Irisanya Moon. My pronouns are she and they. And I'm an author, a witch, a priestess, international teacher, currently a postgrad in Australia. I write books for Moon Books and also for Llewellyn, coming soon. I teach classes around the world. I am also a devotee of Aphrodite, Hecate, Iris, and the Norns. And I have 2 black cats sitting behind me. I love to help people, probably more support people in remembering the love spells that they are.
I love that. Thank you. And I have read several of your books, and I really love that you always have this very supportive voice when you're writing. And it really does feel like that love is at the core of your books, which I really appreciate. And I really love that.
Thank you. I hope so. That's my one goal in anything. Don't learn anything. That's fine. You don't have to remember anything, but just please feel like you belong.
And that's so important. I feel like that's a big priority for me as well. And I really, it's always nice to be in spaces where that's a priority for the people doing the work.
Absolutely. We don't get that in quote unquote everyday life. So necessarily.
Unfortunately not. So you've written about several different gods from the Hellenic pantheon. You just mentioned that you work with several Hellenic deities. I would love to hear a little bit more about that practice, because that's something that's a little bit less familiar to me.
Sure, no problem. Well, first of all, I will say very quickly for the folks who are very hardcore Reconstructionists that I am not. And my witchcraft really began as an intuitive practice of sort of showing up to the magic that presented itself to me and sort of following it. I would say that it's hard for me to remember which god came first. So I think I met Gaia first at some point, but it might have been Artemis. Who knows? But what I want to say is that for me, my practice is about building relationships. And how do I build a better relationship with the gods, with nature, with other people, with myself? And so it really doesn't matter which pantheon I'm working with. However, Aphrodite is the big person in my big person. Yes, she is like a person. She's the big energy, big heart in my life, even though Iris came first. So that's a whole other podcast episode. But Aphrodite kept showing up because I resisted, I think, so much. I thought she was cheesy and superficial and all of the things that society thrusts onto people who are socialized as female. And I did not want anything to do with her, which probably made it me all the more attractive to be someone who might become a devotee. And Aphrodite has changed my life. And while I used to say, love is, oh, it's so superficial and all this stuff, loving yourself is actually the hardest work ever. And so I thought like Hecate and like Caradwin and all these like deep, dark, those are really like terrifying. I was like, nope, loving yourself, real terrifying. Loving other people, real terrifying. More so than looking at any of the quote unquote bad things about me. So
Absolutely. I love that you say that because I feel like that's been very similar to my own journey. The main deity that I work with is Freya, who I feel like also gets stereotyped as that very feminine, pink flowers, love goddess energy. And while that is certainly part of it, and I have learned to savor the pink and the flowers and the femininity, there is some bite to it. There's some darker aspects, if we want to use that language, although I don't love that language.
Yeah.
And you're so right. I feel like one of the big things that Freya calls me to is really radical self-love, like not just that superficial, oh, I like myself, like, oh, I get along with myself, but really deeply loving and accepting myself and accepting
Right.
the uglier parts of myself. And I feel like that has been much more challenging, because I can do sacred rage all day, I can do shadow work all day, but the love practice is much harder work for me.
So real. I mean, I remember seeing something about, I've always been really hesitant around the word healing because that to me like denotes about fixing stuff. But I heard someone, or probably saw a TikTok on someone saying that healing is about accepting yourself. It's not about fixing anything. It's about accepting that who you are is who you are. And if you want something different, then maybe you'll change it. But it's more about learning to love and learning to make space for yourself in all of the ways that we are, because we're complicated and we make mistakes and then we make them again and then we make them again. And it's all part of this experience and everybody does it.
And not to make everything about being queer, although I guess that is literally the premise of my
Get
podcast.
it.
But I feel like that work is so especially important for marginalized people because we are not encouraged to have that deep self-love. We aren't getting that love from external sources to the same extent that someone who's more normative might be. So I feel like, especially in queer spaces, that is a need that I constantly see is there's got to be more love, and we can't have the healing or the justice without that love.
Right. Right. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about queer community is that there is that inherent connection for that and that inherent desire to build that together. I think that it comes from such a place of not great histories, not great families, not great situations, which wish that wasn't the first step, but that's often the thing. And also it comes from such a genuine, authentic wanting, like I said, not only like I want to help people feel like they belong. These are places that people understand that and say that, and show up in the ways that might be helpful. And then also hopefully thrive in those places and then be able to extend that to other folks. I mean, that's community. And this is ideally what community looks like across the way, but not always.
Yeah, and I feel like I know we haven't talked about this yet, but you and I are both very involved in reclaiming. And I feel like that's one of the things that really drew me to reclaiming was that there is that focus on community as the heart of a lot of what we do in those spaces.
Ideally. I mean, I think that one of the most beautiful things about reclaiming, for me at least, I read Spiral Dance a zillion years ago, and then I moved to California and realized, oh, these people are real. And then I went to my first witch camp in 2008. And I remember being in this ritual with all these people I didn't know. I knew nobody at this. Nobody. I drove up with somebody I didn't know. Fortuitous circumstances got me there. And I remember being in that first ritual and we were doing some sort of eye gazing practice for sure. And I looked into this other person's eyes and I was like, oh my gosh, I am home. I have never seen that person again. I have no idea who they are. But that sort of began the journey for me. And in reclaiming, one of the things that, I've said as a teacher, that other folks have said, is that one of the things that's important is that you are your own spiritual authority in community or rooted in community. And meaning, for folks who don't know, that, yeah, I can show up the way that I am. I can show up as this person is in this moment. I can do the thing that feels good for me. I don't have to look like everybody else. I don't have to act like everyone else. I don't have to think like anyone else. The rooted in community part, though, means what I do might impact other people. So there's a balance. That's what community is. But that's one of the things that really draws me in and continues to draw me in, is there's this idea that, yes, we welcome you. We might also have problems along the way because that's community. But there's not a sort of turning away from the reality of that people are going to show up differently. And that's part of it.
Absolutely. We might have hours and hours of consensus meetings about it, but everyone will be welcome at those meetings.
Yeah. And I think, obviously, no community, no group is going to be perfect at this, as Reclaiming has totally shown. But also, I've been in some form of community for 20 years, and that's true. But it's also the way we've learned. Because when I first showed up, we didn't have in the principles of unity anything that sort of spoke to gods that weren't male or female. And then that changed. Didn't have a lot of, probably any, things about trans. Now we do. Didn't have anything about anti-racism. Now we do. And so it's evolution too. And I think that that's one of the things about queer community too, is that it is very much an evolutionary process and an opportunity to personally evolve and also to collectively evolve. And hopefully, just learn how to learn, because I'm still learning things. Probably just this morning I've learned something. I just don't know it yet.
I love that mention you made of evolution, because I feel like we're talking about love and we're talking about community, and I feel like a big part of that is meeting people where they are, and that includes people who have had different experiences of gender, different experiences of race and of racism. And I feel like that is something that at this point, if a community is not doing that, it's not even worth my time. I have become very picky in the last presidential term, I'll say, about.
Evolution also, it's that personal and collective process, right? And I can meet other people as much as I meet myself. And that's where we enter into the good stuff, right? With not only spiritual practice, but also in community practice. This idea that these are spaces in which we can learn more about ourselves so that we can meet other people and expand our thinking, hopefully, and expand our definitions and expand our ability to rise up against growing shenanigans that feel apparently way too comfortable to do that. And I would like to cause some discomfort. And I need help. I need community to do that.
Yes. And at the same time, as we are joining together to cause discomfort for people who could stand to be a little bit less comfortable, I think creating those spaces where we can find comfort, where we can find safety, where we can regulate a little bit, for me, that goes hand in hand with the love aspect, both in my self-love practice. It is a constant battle as a neurodivergent workaholic to force myself to take time out to rest and prioritize pleasure. But also in community, I want other people to be able to do that as well. I don't want everything to always be about the work we're doing. I want us to have space to be together and celebrate together and be comfortable together. And I wonder how that shows up in
Mhm.
your practice, since you
Mhm.
also have a very love centric practice, we'll say.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fair to say. I think that that shows up for me in, and I relate a lot to the way you've described yourself. I think I'm a recovering workaholic, but I definitely have those tendencies. I have a desire to be productive, a desire to accomplish.
Yes. About half my chart is in Virgo, so I just tell people that I have like clinical Virgo.
Oh, we need you. We need you. I don't. I have a lot of Gemini and Sagittarius. So I have a lot of energy and a lot of ideas. And I think I'm right a lot of the time. So in my practice, I think that at least the thing that I have to really work to cultivate is that idea too of it's not all work. Like it really is a thing. Like love is not just like how do we repair things and how do we talk through things. It's that too, but it's also joy. Surprisingly, it's also joy and play and discovery and curiosity. And so my practice more and more these days involves curiosity, involves how can I get curious about the world? How can I get curious about myself? How can I find out if I like this thing or not? Oh, I'm not going to find out unless I go do it. How can I shake up my patterns? I live in a completely different country right now, so that has helped a lot. Uh, discovering new things and being a tourist in my own city is really helpful. But for me, it's also about like finding ways that refill my cup. And so for me, that looks like seeing new things. And that can be as simple as going for a walk by the river here. It could also be going to a thrift store or op shop, as it's called here, or like I went to the museum the other day with a friend and I'd seen this thing so many times already, but there's always something different because you're going with a different person. And so for me, it's more about my practice looking like, how can I really live this life? Not just the practical and the praxis and how do we fix things? I want to be an example of what life can look like when you are, aligning things with love, because I think that is infectious. And I think that that is helpful for folks when they can see something that maybe they couldn't picture on their own.
Yes, that reminds me of one of my favorite books of all time, which is The Body is Not an Apology by Sonia Renee
Yes.
Taylor.
Yes.
And I'm definitely paraphrasing because I don't remember her exact wording, but she says, when you are in your radical self love practice and you are allowing yourself to be your full and complete and loud and expressive self, it gives other people permission to do the same. And that has really stuck with me because I want to be that person. And I feel like that's not to get too intense with it, but I feel like that's a big
Mhm.
part of my calling and how I
Yes.
want to show up for people,
Mhm.
is to be that person who gives other people permission to bring their whole self to the table.
Yes. I often say that, uh, social media being what it is, I will say that, one of the reasons why I've shared more on there than other folks are wanting to is because I do have a lot of privilege in healing out loud and being able to say things that are very true. And I think that, and also hard to share and kind of vulnerable and kind of like, oh, I can't believe I'm admitting this. But also, it is that, and maybe permission isn't quite the right word, but I'm going to go ahead and use it because I can't think of another one right now. But it does offer an example of what, that somebody's not alone. You're not alone in the way that you feel. You're not alone in your confusion. You're not alone in wanting something more. And if I can show that to folks, hopefully they'll be willing to say, like, oh, me too. I'm not the only person. That's not so weird. It's not weird, I assure you. Most things are not unique things. You just need to find people that will admit to them and that will admit that, you know what, sometimes I think really crappy things. And sometimes I do really not great things with people. But admitting it and knowing that you're not alone yeah, I think that being unapologetically who you are attracts the people who are also that, and that hopefully creates a movement of people who are unapologetic and ready to work with the idea of fierce love.
And tying back into queer experiences again,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that was definitely my experience as a baby gay, coming from a conservative religious community in the Bible Belt,
Mm-hmm.
being in
Yeah.
college and being around out gay people for the first time, and having non binary friends who were just really unapologetic about their identity, and being around people who were out and proud for the first time really gave me what I needed to
Mm-hmm.
step into my own identity. And I feel like that's where, for me, the sort of natural overlap between magic and queer identity lives, because I feel like that transformation really is something magical, even if that's not what we choose to call it.
Right. I think it's so real. I think that, magical practice, spiritual practice as a whole is that step away from what is expected. It is that step into something that is possibly transgressive and definitely uh, out of the norm. But it's also scary to do that. I mean, I also grew up in the Midwest, and while for some reason looking back, there was actually a lot of magical stuff in the place that I lived, which is, I was in looking back, I was like, that's really kind of odd, honestly. But and it wasn't really till I got to California that it was much less of a, ooh, let's just whisper about this. And I think for me, there is something that's so generative about being in spaces where people are themselves, where people, who you're meeting. Like, that's probably the thing that I want to say is that, I have some friends that I know exactly who they are and exactly what they think. And I love that, even if it's hard. I, you know, um, and I think that those are just beautiful. That's magic, really. I can write all the books. People can do all the things. That is a magical space. That is a sacred container. That is a healing container. And that is, I think, what love is at its core. That space of you're not alone and you belong here.
I love that. That's beautiful. We could end the podcast there. I feel like
Done.
that's
We're done.
wonderful. But yeah, and I would love to hear a little bit more about how that ties into your
Yeah.
devotional relationships with deity,
Mm-hmm.
because I know that
Mm-hmm.
you've spoken a lot about that in other places, and how that
Huge.
ties into your work as a priestess as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think my work with deity is, an evolution too. I'm perpetually evolving. I think that at least in this moment, it is settled in the fact that, at first it was Aphrodite sort of turning to me and other folks too, but lest anybody get upset that I didn't say their name. But Aphrodite turning to me and saying, like, love this person that you are. And we're still working on it. But like, that was part of it. But that kind of evolved from this relationship between me and her into, oh, how do we do relationships? I had this teacher once that said, probably multiple teachers that have said this to me, how you do one thing is how you do everything. And when I started to think about that, first of all, ouch. Second of all, I was like, yeah, there are, how I relate to deity sometimes is something that I need to look at, because it is how I'm relating to other beings. Like, sometimes with deity, there's this, I'll just do a couple things and everything's going to be fine. I'll show up on these certain dates. I'll do this, that's kind of like the witchcraft 101 situation. Please know that I'm oversimplifying that. But over time, I kind of said, like, oh, but wait, like, I want to be in a better relationship with deity. How do I do that? And I was like, well, I'm reading all these books, I'm not really seeing that. So instead, maybe it is about how I can relate better to, how do I relate with humans? And I started to break that down and kind of go, like, okay, well, when I'm with a human, I need to communicate my needs. I need to be clear about, clear about what I want, which means I have to do some self-awareness practice. And I started to break that down and kind of went, there's something here. Why am I trying to create something new? Like, I already know how to do relationships. I don't always do it, but I know how to do it. And that's kind of how it's evolved for me. So thinking about how can I meet another person / deity? How can I meet myself? And then also, how can I meet community? Because it's all relationships is not just one-on-one. It's also in a bigger context. It's also within. So that's kind of how my practice has evolved with working with gods. Aphrodite was the first, and now I've, all my books include some section on that now, because that was something that was, if you take nothing else from the things that I write, please let it be that. And it doesn't have to be with that deity. Do it with anybody, with your cat, with your home, with your job. It is a dance, I think, of devotion. It is a dance to relate to divine. And not to be, too salesy, but I have a book coming out next year, I think. I don't remember when it is, but it breaks this whole thing down because I just needed to say more.
I was going to say, you wrote that book that you weren't able to find.
Finally, it just took a few years. But yes, I've written a few books that I really wished I would have found earlier, but that's the way it goes because, yeah. So there is, yeah, I think the easiest way to sort of say, like, how does this show up in my practice is like, I think every day, how am I relating? And not in an accusatory, questioning way, like, what are you doing? More about how can I show up today? And that does begin with me in the morning. Like, I do this journaling practice where I just ask a few questions of myself that I read off of some journal that I didn't want to buy. And so I just wrote them down in my own thing. And basically it starts with what am I grateful for? How will I make today great for me? And how am I going to show up? And an affirmation, if that feels like the thing. Usually mine lately has been, I love myself first. And then at night, there's a couple other questions that look like, what went well today? And so I celebrate a little bit. And then another question is, maybe a statement that says, what have I learned today? Just so I can continue this relationship with myself and be in dialogue with myself. And those are also questions I could really show up with the deity with too, and sort of say hey, I'm grateful for you for this. What would make our relationship better? I could actually, show up a little bit more and attend the altar a bit more, et cetera. So that's sort of the way I'm looking at it. I mean, I could say a whole bunch about this. I'm trying not to go off on too many tangents. I think relationship is the way I approach all the gods. Not always well, and not everybody has the same relationship. My book next year talks about the idea of really putting onto deity relationships some of the practices and ideas of polyamory, because I think that there's a lot of wisdom in that. I think there's a lot of wisdom. And how can you do that? So
Absolutely. As someone who is polyamorous on paper, even though I'm not going out and dating right now, I have also found that very helpful, taking those tools that we have in polyamory of how do I develop meaningful, deep, fulfilling connections with multiple people without burning myself out. I have found that so helpful with deity work and with other spirits that I work with as well. And also the idea that I don't have to get everything from one relationship. That's the great thing about polytheism, is I can be working on this thing with this deity, and then I have a completely different relationship with another spirit. And that's what I find really fulfilling about it.
I do too. And I think that probably some of the ways that you and I are talking about that's probably why folks are a little weirded out by poly, because I think that it hits a little too close to the bone of oh, I have to think about different relationships in my life in different ways. You already do. My relationship to work is different to my relationship with my cats. It is different to my relationship with apparently sleep and time management. And so it's okay. Not everything's going to look the same. And to try to make that happen is frustrating and demoralizing. So, I mean, I wrote an article eons ago for Witches and Pagans that was about being a polytheist and talking about how do you navigate time between the different gods. And I didn't identify as polyamorous at that moment. Looking back, okay, I was thinking of that already. I have to think about time. And I have to think about capacity. Like in all of this that we're talking about, in how to show up better in community or how to show up for myself, I got to look at my capacity in all of this and be real about that. I'm not going to be able to do everything 100 and zillion percent. Uh, I was going to say all the time, probably much of the time. Uh, I'm a Sagittarius. I think I can all the time. I think that these are just all really good things to think about and to be like, maybe the way that I have been doing things is not the way I have to do things. Maybe there is something else. And like you said, I don't have to get it all from one deity. I don't have to get it all from one person. And thank goodness, because when I turn that around, I don't want somebody getting everything from me. Oh no, I can barely do that for myself, right? And I like think about this is actually a really expansive way, like queering up your life. Let's just using it as a verb, like queering your life and queering your relationships and queering your practice is actually very expansive. And I imagine that's also very scary because it reminds me of when I first started out in witchcraft and there were all these books, all these things you could do. It's a lot. Where do you start? You start where you are.
Yeah. And where you are is going to be different for everyone. I feel like that's why we have so many people like you and I who are writing books about the things that we would have liked to know or the perspectives we would have liked to have when we were starting out. How can I come at this from a less binary way of interacting with the divine? How can I come at this in a more egalitarian, less hierarchical way? How can I sort of adjust this to be relevant to my experiences and where I'm coming from and my history? And I feel like that's something that we talk about a lot more in pagan spaces in the last few years. And I've been very excited by those conversations because I feel like we're moving away from the idea that there's a one size fits all model that is going to be the one way.
Right. And I think I think that's why I tend to be more attracted to the Greek pantheon because they are a messy group. They're so messy and I love them for that. I think that the Netflix series Chaos was actually really good in capturing that. Also, Jeff Goldblum as Zeus. Oh, good God, that was so perfect for me. Smarmy and yet charismatic and unhinged. Perfect. Um, but I think that the Greeks are messy. They are definitely queer. Like that is just inherent across the board. And I think that it's worthwhile to look at the stories of gods for those moments where, again, even if you don't have community around you, you might have a myth that really speaks to you. There's a zillion different references to include. Aphrodite gets around and does her thing, Apollo, Dionysus, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's also a lot of animals involved. So we could, this is not a binary in this moment. There's also goddesses who are very clearly, sure of who they are and what they don't want. And that is really powerful too. There are places and spaces where some of the gods have been interpreted different ways. Fine. But also, in terms of what shows up, at least in source text, is that there are some goddesses that are like, I don't want anything to do with a dude ever. And great. And they are powerful beings in and of themselves. And there are, so many examples of the mistakes of man or like male bodied, let's say. I have real troubles with assigning gender to deities. I have challenges with it, but it helps people locate stuff. So I just think it's weird.
Well, and I think that's a very old problem because when we look at ancient sources, medieval sources, however far back we want to go, we do see that fluidity. I'm thinking
Mm-hmm.
specifically of like Inanna and Ishtar
Yeah.
having masculine aspects,
Oh, yeah.
which is, I think, the oldest religion we have.
I think so. I think that's what we've landed on. Yeah. I think that we've landed on that's the oldest stories that we have. So, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So as long as humans have had gods, we have struggled to fit those gods or fit our ideas of gender around those gods. And I think that's something I find very empowering as someone whose own gender identity gets a little weird
Mm-hmm.
sometimes.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
But also very, it's a nice reminder that the gods are not human. They're expansive, they can hold multiple experiences, which is a big foundation in my deity practice, is the idea that, you know, a goddess can be multiple things to multiple people, or a deity can be multiple things to multiple people.
Yes. I think that, spiritual practice at its best is a practice of curiosity. It is a practice of expansion, that there is no one way to do things. There are many ways to do things. I think that you can look at stories many different ways. They've been translated many different ways. And that is actually not, it's hard for, if you're a person that needs certainty, you're not going to find it in this. And for me, at least as a human being, I am always grasping for certainty, but I don't do it in myth. And I think that that has actually helped me a lot in not like putting certainty on a pedestal in my life, like recognizing that things can be uncertain and I can still meet them is a big part of my spiritual practice these days too, especially given everything. Go to the stories. The stories continue because they have something in them that has continued to appeal to folks. But also look at stories not from the what does this mean, but like what could it teach me? I don't think that you're going to find one story that stays consistent across translations. You'll see some general themes and stuff like that, but I personally, like, I still have challenges with some of the stories told about Aphrodite because I'm like, that doesn't sound, I don't know about that. But also, it works for some people and it does inform certain things. And even in that, my disagreement with that, there's something to be said. Like, why am I disagreeing with that? And why am I looking at it like that? And then I get to talk about it with people and say, what do you think?
Yes. And that's something that I really love about Greek and Roman polytheism. I have more experience with Roman, but I love epithets because it
Oh,
kind
yeah.
of explicitly names that, you know, the Aphrodite or the Venus that I might be working with on this issue is not the same person who's picking up the phone on this other issue. And I
Yeah.
love having a system for that.
Oh, gosh. Yeah. I mean, I think the epithets are one of my favorite things. And I like teach a lot of like, I think of Aphrodite as I say, like a mirror ball, like wherever you like put the light at, that's what you're going to see. Like, that's what's going to sparkle. And it is a reminder that we're also those complicated beings. The person who shows up, to my workplace is not necessarily the same. It is the same person, but slightly different than the person that shows up in a ritual space, that shows up when my cats are sick, that shows up when I have to make a not fun call or deal with a conflict. Epithets are such a great system of complexity, of inviting complexity in as a possibility, but also recognizing that there are a bunch of labels that the world likes to thrust upon us that we don't necessarily have to take on, that they can also be things that we can move the light away from. And maybe we look at those, but maybe those aren't actually about us. Because a lot of epithets are also given based on, where deities have been located, or one line in one text somewhere. And I don't know, there's just we're going to go back to this word. There's a lot of permissiveness in that. And I think it's really ideal for me. Also, poor Hecate has about, I don't think, a zillion epithets. I think that's the technical term. So many. Aphrodite too.
Every time I talk to someone who works with Hecate, I learn new things about new epithets.
Oh, me too. That's my next book that's coming out in the US. And I felt I had to say to my publisher, I was like, I had to like turn it in and go like, yeah, there's a lot of epithets in here, and I know I didn't get all of them. I, ugh, there's a lot. There's a lot. She's been called on for many, 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 many moons. And so there's a lot. And then there's some that don't have that many, which is, I think, also interesting.
Yeah, I was recently teaching a class on Vesta, and I
Mhm.
she was so important to the Roman state religion, but I was only able to find 4 or 5 epithets, and I was shocked.
That's exactly who I was thinking of, Hestia. I was thinking of Hestia, and I think there's 3 that I put in my book. Yeah, exactly. And that's another thing that I think is really fascinating about Roman and Greek pantheons, is this idea that there are some gods that are so important and they're so much a part of everyday life, but they don't have a lot of writing on them. So, but they have existed. Like they don't have a ton of stories. They don't have a ton of things. Hestia was basically like, you all are crazy. I'm not going to do this Olympus thing. You guys do your thing and keep me out of it. So important. But also, I think that's beautiful because it speaks to the idea of like, you don't have to be this all important, up on Olympus situation in order to really matter in everyday life.
Right, and it's almost like the reason we don't have as much writing is because it was those gods were experienced so intimately in daily life. Like, why would I need to write about the sun? It's always there. I always see it.
That's what I say a lot about those kinds of gods. I say that about the Norns in Norse mythology. Like their time and fate, and they're everywhere. So they're already inherent in every story. Like the muses, also not a lot of things, but also they're mentioned at the beginning of almost every story because that's who you call to before you tell a story. And so like I love that because I think there's space then too for folks who are working with myth to go like, oh, I don't have to be a god, I don't have to be like perfect, and they're not perfect. Let's stop that right now. But I can be who I am and it still matters. It still matters because inherently it does. Inherently, each of us offer something, even if we don't have big old stories told about us.
Yes, and it reminds me of some of the work that I've seen done in activist spaces around moving away from the written word as the end all be all of the work that we do.
Yeah.
I've attended some really interesting conferences where I've been encouraged not to take notes because the people leading that activity want me to focus more on how I'm feeling, how what they say is sitting with me, what my body is doing. And I'm reminded of that more somatic, body based type of experiencing when I think about gods like Hestia, who don't have as much written about them.
Yeah, I think that that's a really important point. And I think that what's interesting too is that in this current time of AI and situations like that, turning back to oral and somatic storytelling, I think is even more important to remember that we all began with, oh, did you hear about this? And we talked to people in our communities and we warned people and we celebrated and we mourned. That is an art I don't want to lose. But I understand in this current situation that I'm also a part of, because we are, a lot of stories are being changed or not held on to because like, oh, I can just look that up. Yeah, but that story might not look the same way when you look it up the next time, or might be driven by an algorithm, or might be, you're seeing what people want you to see. So coming back to community and coming back to these spaces of authenticity and places and storytelling, and how does that make you feel? Where does that land in your body? I think is more valuable in the long run, because all this other stuff is just what people want us to see, I think, and to not only see, but also believe and act on. I would really love to spurn this idea of like a community revolution, like a resurgence of local communities, and coming back to what's the story we tell of ourselves right now, and what's the story we want to tell. And maybe there's some gods who can help us along the way. But what do we believe? And what will we fight to continue to have in our lives?
I think I have been thinking a lot recently about the story that I'm going to tell my great great grandchildren or great great grand nibblings or whoever they may be about the times that we're living in. And that's something I see a lot in the community spaces I'm in, where I think we're really wrestling with that right now. What role are we going to play in the stories of the future?
And it's hard too. Like it's hard to actually even have those conversations. Like I do think a lot about legacy too. Like whenever I'm getting lost in terms of like, what do I do? I'm like, okay, well, what do I want to leave behind? And it's hard right now. Like let's be clear about that. Not only in, political climates around the world, but also in economic situations where people are unsure of how they're going to pay for stuff and everything seems absolutely out of control, and it is. It's hard to think these bigger thoughts and these big, like future thinking things when you're worried about today. And that makes sense. Like, to be clear, this is not, I don't want this to land as a conversation of what are you doing for the future? Like, I get that right now is not easy. I see it every day. I see it in my own life. And in this moment right now, there is an opportunity to come back to the body, to come back to this moment. And each moment that we are, I think, this is my opinion only, each moment I think that we are more present to what is true, each moment builds on on the one before it and creates the future that you want to see without you having to think about what that looks like.
Yes. And in order for there to be stories, there have to be people who are fed and who are housed and who are
Yes.
taken care of by their community. And it's funny that we talked about Hestia and Vesta today because my work with Vesta is mostly in that area, but I feel like that is equally important.
Absolutely. I mean, it's not shocking that like overall society kind of like disses that's work, like it's just women's work. I was like, community building is like the work of community. That's the work of how we all got fed and clothed and protected from wild beasts. It's important. Like it's a big effing deal.
It is. Yeah.
But it's often the thing that people like, I want to get to the fun ritual stuff. I get you. We don't get there unless we all have eaten and we're not constantly looking over our shoulders, uh, thinking that something's threatening us.
Yes. Somebody has to do the dishes, somebody has to cook the meals, somebody has to do the fundraising. And I know it's not glamorous, but it's.
My mentor that I learned from and who was always into sacred hospitality, good old Copper was into that, and the sacred schlep, the people also need to put the chairs away and bring the food and cook the food and sit next to the person who's sitting by themselves and make sure they're okay. That is just as important, more so than any flashy whatever. Because again, it comes back. Community is about helping people feel like they belong.
And getting back to that idea of legacy, I never met Copper, but I hear all the time from people who shared community space with her how valuable that was and how much of an impact she made. So maybe the story that we tell is going to be that we took care of each other. And I think that would be okay.
I think that would be fantastic. If I was known for nothing else, great, super. and even that I actually just don't care like what I'm seen as, but I do want, like, if there's just one person that tells a story that I was there for them in a moment that they needed it, and that they then, from that moment were able to resource and offer that to someone else, that is how we get things done. And it's how we do it with capacity. We don't have to rise up all the armies and stuff. We do need to make sure that people that we love are okay. And from there, may that spread.
May that spread. Where can people find you if they want to check out more of your work?
Yeah, thank you. So the best place is my website, irisanyamoon.com, and I'm updating it right now. So that's cool. That's the best place. I have a Substack, which might turn into a not Substack at some point and become a different platform, but I've been in school and I have not had time to think about that. So my website will have all my books on it. I'm not selling any books because I'm living in Australia right now. I'm not physically selling them. Please go to other places. I put links and everything so that folks want to find them. The Substack, I write a weekly heart magic Substack where I say things that I think are of the moment. I'm not going to say important, but I'm going to say of the moment. In terms of things that are coming up, I'm coming off of school. I know I've already said this, so I'm working on restarting some teaching and stuff like that, but it's been, a lot to be taught. And other things that are coming up. So book-wise, in the end of June, beginning of July of 2026, my book on Hecate is coming out. Hecate, goddess of magic and witchcraft. Pretty sure that's what it is. And it's already like really high in like all the pre-sales, which is real exciting. So she's coming out, and the cover art is done by a friend of mine. So support local artists.
It's a really beautiful cover. It's a gorgeous cover.
Luke is amazing. Luke is an amazing artist, and he actually lives out here in Australia. So, and then my next book that's coming out is Athena. That comes out October of 2026. And another friend of mine did that art for that cover. All right, now it gets a little slippery of the other things, but I can tell you what books I have written and that are going to be published. I don't remember exactly when they're all coming. My next book on Aphrodite is coming out next March in 2027. This is, for those who aren't able to, don't want to, it's my priestess training for Aphrodite work that I've done for the last 2 years with groups. It's in a book form. So it goes over the course of a year by different epithets of Aphrodite. And so we work with those, sort of talk about the history of each of them, where they've shown up. And then we do exercises and practices that are not just for priestessing work or priestexing work, it's also for your own personal work. And then I think it's mid-year in 2027. So June, July-ish is the Dance of Devotion, which is creating and sustaining relationships with deities and the divine. So it is very clear at multiple points during the book. It's not just for deities. You could also, this works with an ocean. This works with whatever you want. And then after that, I don't know when this is coming out, is a book on Zeus. I have never written about a male-bodied deity. It was a challenge.
That's exciting though, because there's so much misinformation about Zeus specifically. That's I'm sure that was fun to sort through.
Oh, Zeus. Here's what I'll say about that. Remember at the beginning where I talked about, I thought Aphrodite was one way, and then I learned differently. That was how I tried to approach Zeus. I have been fed a lot of things, as have a lot of people, about Zeus, and I wanted to come to him as open and as curious as possible. We'll see what people think with what I came to. Because I did come to a really interesting conclusion in the end that I didn't expect, and I think is also very timely.
I'm excited.
No idea when that's coming up. I know that it's written and it's done. I have to get some more endorsements, and then I'll know. And then another book that is being finished right now. I can talk about this. Title might change, but the book that is actually getting finished today at the time of recording, because I'm doing the final edits today. It's me and my co-author, Halo Quinn. We co-wrote a book that's tentatively called Neurodivergent Witchcraft. So it is talking about neurodivergence, and then ways that we can work with our brains in order to create our own magical practices that work for our brains. And very excited about it. There's also practices and rituals and wisdom from other witches in there that we've put in there. And we're also really trying to make it ADHD friendly, so that there's like boxes and, there's every section has a too long didn't read. So if you just, you want to see what's in it before you actually spend the time reading a whole thing, at the end, there's probably going to be this really cool checklist of anyways, there's a whole bunch of things, and we're very excited. And that is, if all goes to plan, it will be out next year. Either the spring or the fall, North America style.
That's fantastic. That's really exciting.
Yeah. So lots of things are coming for me. And I'm also a master of writing, editing, and publishing student right now. So, and I'm already looking at my PhD like a weirdo. So I'm going to do a lot more writing, folks. So please reach out. I love interacting with folks. So there's a contact form, I think, on my website. Should be. I just made it the other day. Hopefully it's still there. But yeah, also I do one-on-one mentoring if you're into that. And yeah, I'm out and about, and hopefully we'll travel to teach again in the future, but I don't have any plans right now.
That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Once again, many, many thanks to Irisanya for joining me this week. I have truly loved our conversation. And listeners, make sure that you check out her books because they are truly fantastic. As always, you can find show notes, including a complete list of any sources or research mentioned during the episode, on my website, which is samwisethewitch.com. You can also find me on social media at samwisethewitch, except for on TikTok, where I'm author Sam Wise. And as a reminder, if you live in the southeastern United States and would like to hang out with me in person, I am running around to a whole bunch of Pride events this month. And if you resonated with the things that Irisanya and I talked about today, I really think you will love the event I'm going to the weekend this episode releases. That event is Bloom, a Sapphic Solstice experience, on Sunday, June 21st, here in Atlanta, Georgia. This is a lush, sensual, queer garden party themed burlesque event hosted by the wonderful folks at Sapphic Souls. There will be burlesque, pole dancing, fire, DJs, and immersive garden magic. I'll be in the vendor area doing tarot readings and giving away free resources for developing your queer pleasure magic practice. I will have that event page linked in the show notes if that's something that interests you. I will also be at the Rome, Georgia Pride Festival on June 27th. I'll be doing tarot readings at the vendors market, and I am so excited to get to spend some time with my North Georgia family and friends. And finally, on June 28th, I will be at the Southern Fried Queer Pride Festival at Little Five Points in Atlanta, Georgia, which is a festival that centers Black and brown queer folks, a mission that I am very excited to support. And all of those events will be linked in the show notes for anyone who is interested in catching me at any of those places. Until next time, I hope you all stay safe, continue to have a happy Pride Month, and remember that you are magical. See you next time.